Please be advised, this podcast contains graphic audio and themes that may not be appropriate for all listeners. We just listened to the extraordinary emotions that have been playing out for months in the complex legal battle between survivors and the families of the dead. Now we're going to look closely at how that outcome could have been avoided, who's potentially to blame, and what's being done or not done to fix the problems that led up to it. Because no matter how you look at this, over the course of 40 years, decisions were made in what turned out to be a deadly chain of events. Those decisions were made by politicians, developers, architects, engineers, even the members of the condo board of Champlain Towers South.
It's so obvious to see that if you give people enough rope to hang themselves with, they're going to do it. All they did was keep kicking the extra expenses down the road. I'm sorry, it gets me aggravated thinking about it. Nope, I'm on Social Security. No, I don't want to contribute another $50 a month. Well, in Champlain Towers, they kept kicking it down the road, and they were short $14.3 million. It's beyond frustrating. It's beyond frustrating.
This is Eric Glazer. He's a lawyer specializing in Florida condo law. He writes a popular blog and even has his own condo law radio show. He's watched this unfold, and you can hear his exasperation. There are two things that bother him above all. First, that the state of Florida does not require any high-rise inspections. The 40-year recertification process is just in Miami-Dade County. What's more, the state doesn't require condominium boards to collect from owners what's called a reserve fund. Basically, that's a pool of money that's set aside for repairs and maintenance, and usually it's tacked on as a monthly fee to owners, who of course want to keep those fees as low as possible. And as we've been detailing in previous episodes, Champlain Towers South needed major and expensive repairs.
There's just so many things that came together here that caused a tragic, tragic situation. The practical reason why it happened. Lack of money. People just didn't have the money to fix it. And the problem is they could have fixed it when the job was probably just a few $1 million, $3 million. But even that starts to sound like a lot of money to a lot of people when there's no reserve account.
Glazer refers to the fact that for years, well before engineer Frank Morabito wrote the 40-year recertification report, the condo board consistently voted to waive the creation of a fund for any needed fixes to the building, which was perfectly legal in the state of Florida. Morabito's list of structural problems was extensive. He estimated the repairs would cost around $15 million, and he was clear about how severe the problems were.
He warned them that this problem was going to get worse, if not fixed. And it did. It ballooned from a project that could have been fixed for a few $1 million into a project that turned into $15 million. And go ask people for $15 million when COVID was absolutely raging and people were unemployed and out of work. Pretty tough job that board was in. So if funding was done the way it should have been done, there would have been a lot more money. It would have been a lot more easy to get the repairs done at Champlain Towers than it was. But blame it on the Florida Legislature. That's all. All these, they didn't do it. They didn't break the law. They did exactly what the law allowed them to do. Waive reserves every single year.
So let's take a minute to look at the law so we better understand how and why the board did what it did. Current Florida law leaves a lot of rulemaking about buildings to local governments. And remember, buildings in Florida aren't required at all to have a fund for repairs. It is up to them. And maybe most shocking of all is that only 2 counties in Florida, 2, Miami-Dade and Broward, which is just north of Miami-Dade, and the second most populous county in the state, require any regular structural inspections at all. And even then, the first inspection, 40 years after the original construction. Eric Glazer.
How crazy is it to have a system in place that says a developer builds a building, a massive, tall structure, and issues a certificate of occupancy for that building, and the next time that building sees a building official is 40 years later when it needs a recertification. Now, what happens in the interim? This is what angers me. Because we build buildings on the water here, close to the salt water, and you mix it up with the heat that we have, our buildings deteriorate quicker than most buildings around the country. Can you imagine building a building on the water and never having to have it inspected until 40 years? I mean, I don't know. I could lecture on this for, hours, quite frankly. If you want to let me go, I can just go. There's just so many things to be angry about.
Across the U.S., about a dozen cities require some kind of regular facade inspections. That's to ensure nothing falls off the outside of a building. But that's not a requirement in Florida, where building departments are notoriously understaffed, and most condo boards are made up of volunteers who have little or no experience with building maintenance or finances. And of course, as Glazer says, nobody wants to be the one to tell their neighbors it's time to write a big check to fix the building.
Boards are very reluctant to tell each unit owner, guess what, guys? Here comes a $50,000 special assessment or more. So instead of doing that, again, repairs get kicked down the road.
So even though the damage on the pool deck and in the garage were visible and well known, the unit owners in Champlain Towers South bickered over paying for them and delayed getting them done. And as recently as a few months before the collapse, the condo board was well aware that the building was deteriorating rapidly. In a letter to the board of directors back in April 2021, less than 2 months before the disaster, board president Gene Wadnicki laid out the findings of the Morabito report and an action plan to fix the building, including extensive concrete and waterproofing work on the pool deck as well as in the parking garage. Wadnicki emphasized that the building had in fact deteriorated even more since the report was written back in 2018. The decay was accelerating. She wrote, quote, "When you can visually see the concrete spalling or cracking, that means the rebar holding it together is rusting or deteriorating beneath the surface." She also added, quote, "A lot of this work could have been done or planned for in years gone by, but this is where we are now." The Condo Association approved the over $15 million in repairs, and the owners were on track to start paying monthly assessments on top of their regular fees. The assessments were set to begin in July. The building had to get a loan to finance the work because the total cash on hand for repairs, only $707,003.96. The work was just getting started when disaster struck. We now know, of course, that it was too little, too late. But is the board to blame? Certainly some of the families of the dead think so, as we heard in episode 7. But questions of legal culpability are anything but clear-cut. Andres Figlucci.
Whether the condo board is responsible or to what extent they're responsible for this, that's a really tricky question. This board was not ignoring the problems. They were aware of the problems. They were trying to address the problems. They had, in fact, raised a significant assessment on their owners. The problem was they took so long to do it. And that's because of that friction that's inherent in these condos between the responsibility of the boards to safeguard the property, to protect residents, but also the interest of the owners who don't want to pay a big assessment. I mean, in some cases, these assessments were $40,000-$50,000 per unit, and somebody on a fixed income, somebody who has not budgeted for that, that's quite a shock to them. And so there's an inherent conflict in the whole condo structure and the way they're set up that almost puts the boards and the residents at odds many times. So if you want to, on the one hand, ensure that the building's going to be safe and maintained properly, that costs money. And on the other hand, if you want to ensure the affordability and that people can continue to live in these condos, how do you address that?
And so we go back to the fact that what the board was doing was legal. And they were reckoning with the fact that many of their residents were older and living on fixed incomes, like so many millions of others who live in older buildings throughout Florida. So it's not hard to understand why they made the decisions they did. Eric Glazer.
We have a lot of 55 and over communities here in South Florida. You're telling people that are over 55 years old to put money away for a roof that may need to be replaced in 25 years. So what do they say? Why in the world should I do that? I may not be around to see that roof being built 25 years from now. So why should I contribute to it now? The problem is the people that lived in your unit 20 years ago thought the same way, right? And eventually someone's going to roll a 7 while they're living there, and that roof is going to need to be replaced. That's the problem. That's what it boils down to. Someone's going to live there when the bill comes due. And if you have not been reserving all along, wow, you are in a world of trouble. I don't mean to talk bad about dead people. That's not what I want to do. And please, I don't want you to think I'm sitting here second guessing anything that the board did. They did what they were allowed to do in all candor by law. The law let them do it. This was simply a ticking time bomb that was going to explode, and it did in Surfside. That's exactly what happened.